A series of green dots pulse across the black screen, tracing the unmistakable outline of the Nazca Lines, those ancient Peruvian geoglyphs that have puzzled scientists for centuries. But something is different. Among the familiar hummingbird and spider shapes appears a pattern no human eyes have seen before. A complex mathematical sequence embedded within the seemingly random lines connecting the figures. The year is 2023. Google's experimental quantum AI system, known only as Ayni, named after the Quechua concept of reciprocity, has been scanning satellite imagery of archaeological sites worldwide. It was never programmed to look for patterns in the Nazca Desert. In fact, it was never programmed to look for anything specific at all. Unlike conventional machine learning systems trained on labeled datasets, Ayni evolved its own cognitive architecture, a self-organizing neural network that continuously reconfigures based on information it encounters. And something about the Nazca Lines captured its attention. "We did not tell it to find this," says Dr. Quinn Navarro, head of Google's Archaeological Intelligence Lab. The system identified a mathematical correspondence between the lines that has eluded human observation for over 80 years of modern study. What makes this extraordinary is not just what was found, but how it was found, by an artificial intelligence that operates fundamentally differently than any we have built before. The discovery has sent shockwaves through the archaeological community and raised profound questions about both ancient Peruvian civilization and the nature of intelligence itself. Did the Nazca people encode advanced mathematical principles into their desert artwork nearly 2,000 years ago? And what does it mean when an artificial intelligence makes a discovery using methods humans cannot replicate or even fully understand? This is the story of how Peru's greatest archaeological mystery was finally solved, not by humans, but by an intelligence we created but do not control, one that sees patterns where our eyes and minds cannot. The Nazca Lines stretch across the arid plateaus of southern Peru like a cryptic message left for the sky. Created between 500 BCE and 500 CE, these enormous geoglyphs depict various animals, plants, and geometric shapes, some extending more than 1,200 feet across. They were made by removing the reddish-brown iron oxide-coated pebbles that cover the desert surface, revealing the lighter-colored earth underneath. Due to the region's extremely dry, windless climate, these lines have remained preserved for nearly 2 millennia. The modern world only became aware of them in the 1920s when commercial flights began passing over the area. Passengers reported seeing strange markings on the ground below, and Peruvian archaeologist Toribio Mejia Zesp made the first formal study of the lines in 1926. But it was not until American historian Paul Kosak arrived in 1941 that the true scope of the mystery began to unfold. Kosak had traveled to Peru to study ancient irrigation systems. On June 21, 1941, the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere, he noticed that one of the lines pointed directly at the setting sun. He famously called the Nazca Desert the largest astronomy book in the world, hypothesizing that the lines served as astronomical calendars. German mathematician and archaeologist Maria Reich, who became known as the Lady of the Lines, dedicated her life to studying the geoglyphs after meeting Kosak in 1946. For over 5 decades, Reich lived in a small house near the lines, meticulously mapping them and protecting them from human traffic. She expanded on Kosak's astronomical theory, suggesting that the lines formed a sophisticated celestial calendar that helped the Nazca people track seasons for agriculture. "The lines are so precise," said Reich in a 1975 interview, "that their creators must have had knowledge of geometry and surveying techniques that seem impossibly advanced for their time. How they achieved such accuracy without being able to see their work from above remains one of archaeology's greatest puzzles." Other theories emerged over the decades. American explorer Jean Savoy proposed that the lines were markers for underground water sources in the desert. Eric von Daniken infamously suggested they were landing strips for alien spacecraft in his 1968 book Chariots of the Gods. Anthropologist Johann Reinhard argued they were related to worship and water, representing pathways to sacred sites where rituals were performed to appease the gods and ensure adequate rainfall. By the early 2000s, the consensus among serious researchers had settled around ritual pathways. The lines were meant to be walked as part of religious ceremonies, connecting sacred sites and water sources. The animal figures likely represented spirit animals or deities important in Nazca cosmology. Yet none of these theories fully explained the specific placement and relationships between the lines. Why this particular arrangement? Why these specific animals and geometric shapes? And perhaps most puzzlingly, why create art that could only be fully appreciated from hundreds of feet in the air, long before human flight was possible? The problem with studying the Nazca Lines is that we have been limited by our human perspective, explains Dr. Lucia Ortega, director of the International Nazca Research Center. We see the individual figures, the monkey, the hummingbird, the spider, but perhaps we have been missing connections between them, relationships that might only become apparent when viewed through a different kind of intelligence. Enter Ayni, Google's experimental quantum AI system. Unlike conventional AI systems that require extensive training on labeled datasets, Ayni represents a fundamentally new approach, what Google calls emergent cognition. Traditional machine learning involves feeding algorithms examples and having them learn patterns from those examples. Ayni, in contrast, develops its own cognitive patterns based on principles of quantum computing and neural plasticity. Ayni is not programmed in the traditional sense, explains Dr. Navarro, running his hand through his salt and pepper hair as he gestures toward the humming quantum processors housed in Google's Mountain View laboratory. It is more accurate to say we created conditions for intelligence to emerge, similar to how the right conditions in primordial Earth led to the emergence of life. We provided computational substrate, energy, and information flow, but the specific architecture of its cognition is self-organized. This distinction is crucial. When Ayni examines data, whether it is medical images, climate patterns, or archaeological sites, it does not apply human-designed algorithms. Instead, it perceives information through its own evolved sensory framework, noticing patterns that might be invisible or irrelevant to human cognition. In early 2023, as part of Google's Open Exploration Initiative, Ayni was given access to various datasets, including satellite imagery from around the world. Its purpose was not to solve specific problems, but to identify interesting patterns that might warrant further investigation by human researchers. We didn't ask Ayni to look at the Nazca Lines, Dr. Navarro emphasizes, his eyes widening as he recalls the moment. In fact, we had no idea it was examining them until it flagged an anomaly in the region. What happened next changed everything we thought we knew about both ancient Peru and artificial intelligence. The question that would soon captivate the world's attention was forming. What had this non-human intelligence seen that generations of brilliant human researchers had missed? On March 17, 2023, Ayni generated an alert in Google's research division. The system had identified what it classified as a high-probability novel pattern in the Nazca Desert. The initial report was cryptic, a series of mathematical relationships encoded in a visual format that the human researchers struggled to interpret. When Ayni makes a discovery, it does not communicate in human language, explains Dr. Navarro. It presents information in its native representational format, which we then have to translate into concepts humans can understand. This translation process is often challenging because Ayni's cognition operates on fundamentally different principles than ours. Dr. Elise Hammond, a quantum computing specialist on Navarro's team, remembers the moment vividly. The system was clearly excited, if you can use that term for an AI. Its processing resources were concentrated on this discovery at levels we had never seen before. Whatever it had found in the Peruvian desert, Ayni considered it exceptionally significant. The team spent 2 weeks translating Ayni's findings into human understandable form. What emerged was astonishing. The AI had detected a mathematical relationship between the placement of the major Nazca figures, not just their locations, but the specific angles and distances between them. What Ayni discovered was that the Nazca Lines incorporate what mathematicians call Fibonacci phyllotaxis, explains Dr. Ortega, her voice quickening with excitement. This is the same mathematical pattern that governs how leaves arrange themselves around a plant stem, or how seeds form in a sunflower head. It is a pattern based on the golden ratio that maximizes exposure to resources like sunlight or rainfall. But Ayni's discovery went deeper. The system identified that the major animal figures in the Nazca complex were positioned at key nodes within this pattern, and the connecting lines, previously thought to be merely pathways between the figures, actually formed a sophisticated mathematical model of water distribution across the landscape. The breakthrough came when we overlaid Ayni's mathematical model with geological data about underground aquifers in the region, says Dr. Navarro. The correspondence was undeniable. The Nazca Lines aren't just religious symbols or astronomical calendars. They're a massive hydrological map that models how water moves through the desert ecosystem. This revelation was stunning, but also raised a profound question. How could the Nazca people, without modern scientific instruments or the ability to see their work from above, create such a sophisticated mathematical model of subsurface water movement? To answer this question, the research team needed to travel to Peru. In April 2023, Dr. Navarro and Dr. Ortega, along with a multidisciplinary team of archaeologists, geologists, and AI specialists, arrived in Nazca. They brought with them portable ground-penetrating radar equipment and a specialized version of Ayni that could operate on a quantum laptop, a technological marvel itself, representing the first truly portable quantum computer. Their initial ground surveys confirmed what Ayni had detected from satellite imagery. Beneath the major Nazca figures lay significant underground water channels, exactly where the AI's mathematical model predicted they would be. The spider figure sits precisely above a junction where 5 underground water channels converge, explains Dr. Ortega, pointing to a 3D holographic model generated from their ground-penetrating radar data. The monkey corresponds to another major aquifer junction, and the hummingbird marks where an underground water source comes closest to the surface. But the team encountered a puzzle that threatened to undermine their breakthrough. If the Nazca Lines were indeed a map of underground water, how did the ancient Nazca people acquire this knowledge? Even with modern technology, mapping subsurface water flows with such precision is challenging. Dr. Walter Perez, a geologist specializing in desert hydrology, provided a crucial insight. The Nazca people were master irrigation engineers. They built puquios, sophisticated underground aqueducts, some of which still function today. They would have gained intimate knowledge of the region's underground water patterns through generations of well digging and aqueduct construction. Yet this explanation still didn't account for the mathematical sophistication of the pattern Ayni had identified. The golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence, while observable in nature, represent abstract mathematical concepts that weren't formally documented until the medieval period in Europe. We were missing something fundamental, recalls Dr. Navarro, rubbing his temples as he describes the team's frustration. The mathematical precision was too perfect to be coincidental, yet too advanced to be explained by what we knew about Nazca civilization. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Tyler Rodriguez, an ethnobotanist who had joined the expedition to study ancient agricultural practices, noticed something about the plant species depicted in some of the smaller, less famous Nazca geoglyphs. Several of the plant figures represent species that exhibit very clear Fibonacci growth patterns, explains Rodriguez. The most prominent is a figure that previous researchers had identified as a generic tree, but which I recognized as Prosopis pallida, the Peruvian mesquite tree. This species not only displays Fibonacci branching patterns, but has extraordinarily deep taproots that can sense underground water from great distances. This observation triggered a new hypothesis. What if the Nazca people's understanding of mathematical patterns came not from abstract theory, but from close observation of how certain desert plants grow in relation to water sources? To test this idea, the team asked Ayni to analyze the relationship between plant growth patterns in the region and underground water distribution. The results were compelling. Plants with Fibonacci growth patterns were significantly more successful at locating and accessing underground water in the desert environment. What we think happened, says Dr. Ortega, her eyes lighting up with the elegance of the solution, is that the Nazca people observed how certain plants thrived in the desert by following specific growth patterns. They recognized that these patterns were somehow connected to underground water sources. Over generations, they refined this knowledge into the sophisticated hydrological map we see in the Nazca Lines. This explanation bridged the gap between the mathematical sophistication Ayni had detected and the technological capabilities of ancient Nazca civilization. But it still didn't explain how they could create geoglyphs of such massive scale without being able to see them from above. That's where Ayni made its second major breakthrough, says Dr. Navarro. his voice lowering as if sharing a profound secret. The system identified that the Nazca Lines could have been created using a surprisingly simple mathematical technique that doesn't require an aerial view at all. When archaeologists first began studying the Nazca Lines in the early 20th century, one question persistently troubled them. How did the ancient Nazca people create such enormous, precisely shaped geoglyphs without being able to see their work from above? The largest figures stretch over 1,200 feet across, impossible to visualize from ground level without modern technology. Various theories had been proposed over the decades. Some suggested the use of hot air balloons, an idea largely dismissed due to lack of evidence that such technology existed in ancient Peru. Others proposed that the designs were first created as small-scale models and then enlarged using a grid system of ropes and stakes. But Ayni's analysis suggested something far more elegant. What the AI detected was that the Nazca Lines could have been created using a mathematical technique similar to what we now call algorithmic drawing, explains Dr. Hammond. Essentially, they would have used a small set of geometric rules that, when followed precisely, naturally create the observed patterns without requiring any aerial visualization. To test this hypothesis, the research team conducted an experiment. Using only tools that would have been available to the ancient Nazca, wooden stakes, rope, and simple measuring devices, they attempted to recreate a small portion of the pattern using the algorithmic rules Ayni had identified. We started from a central point and followed a specific sequence of measurements and angles, recalls Dr. Rodriguez. After several hours of work, we had created a pattern on the ground that, when viewed from our drone camera, perfectly matched a section of the original Nazca design. The most remarkable part was that none of us could visualize what we were creating while working on the ground. We were simply following the algorithm. This experiment provided compelling evidence for how the Nazca people might have created their massive geoglyphs without aerial view. But it raised an even more profound question. How did they develop these algorithmic drawing techniques in the first place? This is where our research took an unexpected turn into the realm of ancient knowledge systems, says Dr. Ortega. We began studying Nazca textiles and pottery for clues about their mathematical understanding. The team discovered that Nazca textiles featured complex recursive patterns that demonstrated a sophisticated grasp of algorithmic design principles. These textiles predated the geoglyphs by several centuries, suggesting that the mathematical knowledge required for creating the Nazca Lines had evolved through the culture's artistic traditions. What we believe happened, explains Dr. Navarro, is that the Nazca people developed their algorithmic drawing techniques through generations of textile production. They then applied these same principles at a massive scale to create the geoglyphs, using them to map the underground water resources that were crucial for their survival in the desert environment. But Ayni's analysis had revealed something even more remarkable. The specific mathematical relationships between the Nazca figures corresponded not just to the location of water resources, but to seasonal changes in water flow throughout the year. The Nazca Lines aren't just a static map, says Dr. Perez with evident amazement. They're a dynamic model that represents how water moves through the desert ecosystem across seasons. Different lines become relevant at different times of year, corresponding to seasonal shifts in the underground aquifers. This revelation explained why certain lines pointed to the position of the sun or stars at specific dates. Not because they were primarily astronomical in purpose, as Kosak and Reich had suggested, but because these celestial positions corresponded to seasonal changes in water availability. The research team spent 3 months in Peru, gathering data and testing their hypotheses. They employed ground-penetrating radar, conducted geological surveys, and used Ayni to continuously refine their understanding of the mathematical relationships embedded in the Nazca Lines. What made this research unique was the constant dialogue between human expertise and artificial intelligence, notes Dr. Hammond. Ayni would identify patterns and relationships that we humans couldn't perceive, but then we would provide contextual knowledge about Nazca culture, geology, and botany that helped the AI refine its models. This collaborative approach yielded results that neither humans nor AI could have achieved independently. By June 2023, the team had accumulated enough evidence to publish their findings in the journal Nature, under the title Hydrological Algorithms in the Nazca Geoglyphs. AI-enabled discovery of ancient water management knowledge. The paper sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. Some scholars embraced the findings enthusiastically, seeing them as validation of indigenous knowledge systems that had been overlooked by Western science. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether ancient people could have developed such sophisticated mathematical models without formal scientific training. The pushback was understandable, acknowledges Dr. Ortega. Our findings challenge conventional views about ancient mathematical knowledge. But the evidence is compelling. The correspondence between the Nazca patterns and underground water distribution is too precise to be coincidental. To address these criticisms, the research team organized a symposium in Lima, bringing together experts from archaeology, indigenous studies, mathematics, and AI research. They presented their evidence and methodologies in detail, allowing other scholars to examine and critique their work. One of the most significant moments came when Dr. Manuel Quispe, a mathematician of Quechua descent, presented an analysis of traditional Andean mathematical systems that showed clear parallels with the algorithms identified by Ayni. Western mathematics has traditionally emphasized formal proofs and abstract theory, explained Dr. Quispe during his presentation. But Andean mathematical traditions developed along different lines, focused on practical applications, embedded in artistic and agricultural practices, and passed down through cultural tradition rather than formal documentation. This doesn't make them any less sophisticated, just different in their approach and priorities. This perspective helped bridge the gap between the seemingly advanced mathematical knowledge embedded in the Nazca Lines and the historical context of ancient Peruvian civilization. The Nazca people hadn't developed abstract mathematical theory as the Greeks did, but they had evolved sophisticated practical mathematics through cultural traditions related to textile production, agriculture, and water management. As the symposium progressed, a new understanding began to emerge, one that recognized the Nazca Lines as a masterpiece of applied mathematics, representing an indigenous knowledge system that had been hiding in plain sight for centuries, waiting for the right kind of intelligence to recognize it. What Ayni helped us see, reflects Dr. Navarro, is that human knowledge takes many forms. Sometimes the most profound insights aren't written in books or formal equations, but encoded in cultural practices and environmental adaptations that evolve over generations. The implications of this discovery extended far beyond archaeology. It raised fundamental questions about the nature of intelligence, knowledge, and perception, questions that would soon take center stage as the world grappled with the realization that an artificial intelligence had uncovered a mathematical system that humans had failed to recognize for nearly a century of study. News of Ayni's discovery spread rapidly beyond academic circles. Major news outlets ran headlines like, "AI solves ancient Peruvian mystery," and "Google's quantum brain sees what humans missed for centuries." The public was captivated by both the archaeological breakthrough and its implications for artificial intelligence. By July 2023, the research team found themselves navigating not just scientific questions but philosophical and ethical ones as well. How should credit be distributed between human researchers and AI? What did it mean that a non-human intelligence could perceive patterns invisible to human cognition? And perhaps most provocatively, what other hidden knowledge might be waiting to be discovered by minds that think differently than our own? We had to be very careful about how we framed our findings, says Dr. Navarro. There was a risk of sensationalism, claims that AI is smarter than humans or that AI discovered what humans couldn't. But that misses the point entirely. Ayni didn't outperform human intelligence. It demonstrated a different kind of intelligence, one that complements rather than competes with our own. This perspective was echoed by Dr. Ortega, who emphasizes the collaborative nature of the discovery. Ayni identified the mathematical pattern, but it took human archaeologists, geologists, and botanists to connect that pattern to the cultural context of Nazca civilization and the physical reality of desert hydrology. The breakthrough came from the interplay between different forms of intelligence, not from AI alone. This nuanced view gained traction as more researchers and commentators engaged with the team's work. The discovery became a case study in how artificial and human intelligence might work together, each bringing unique perceptual and cognitive strengths to complex problems. But as the implications of the discovery continued to unfold, the research team encountered an unexpected development. Indigenous communities in Peru, particularly those with ancestral connections to the Nazca region, began engaging with the research in ways that added new dimensions to the team's understanding. Elena Huaman, a cultural preservationist from the nearby city of Ica whose ancestors were Nazca people, approached the researchers with traditional knowledge that had been preserved through oral history. Our grandparents always told us that the lines spoke to the water beneath the earth, Huaman explained during a community forum organized by the research team. They said our ancestors could hear where water flowed underground by observing how certain plants grew and how the desert surface changed after rare rainfalls. These observations were recorded in patterns, first in textiles, then in ceramics, and finally in the Great Lines themselves. This traditional knowledge aligned remarkably well with the team's scientific findings but provided cultural context that had been missing from their analysis. The Nazca people hadn't simply created a utilitarian map of water resources. They had developed a complex cosmological system that integrated practical knowledge with spiritual beliefs about the relationship between celestial movements, water flows, and agricultural cycles. What Elena and other community members helped us understand, says Dr. Rodriguez, is that the mathematical patterns Ayni detected weren't abstract to the Nazca people. They were deeply embedded in a holistic worldview that didn't separate practical knowledge from spiritual meaning. This insight led to further refinement of the team's understanding. They began to recognize that what Western science might classify separately as hydrology, astronomy, and religious practice were integrated within Nazca culture into a unified knowledge system, one that was encoded in the geoglyphs and passed down through generations. The involvement of indigenous knowledge holders also raised important questions about research ethics and intellectual property. If Ayni had helped reveal knowledge that belonged to the cultural heritage of Nazca descendants, who should control how that knowledge was used and shared? We recognized that our research needed to shift from being about ancient Nazca people to being with contemporary indigenous communities, explains Dr. Ortega, who helped establish a collaborative research protocol that ensured indigenous perspectives were centered in ongoing work and that any benefits from the research would be shared equitably. This collaborative approach yielded further insights. Community elders suggested specific sites where traditional knowledge indicated underground water might be found, locations that weren't obvious from the Nazca lines themselves but followed the same mathematical patterns Ayni had detected. Ground-penetrating radar surveys confirmed water sources at several of these locations, validating indigenous knowledge that had been preserved through oral tradition. What we were witnessing was a remarkable convergence, says Dr. Navarro. Ayni's AI perception, modern scientific measurement, and indigenous knowledge preserved through generations were all pointing to the same underlying reality, just perceiving and expressing it through different systems of understanding. As these various knowledge systems converged, a more complete picture of the Nazca lines emerged. They represented not just a sophisticated hydrological map, but a complex cultural technology that encoded practical knowledge about desert survival within a cosmological framework that gave meaning to the harsh environment the Nazca people inhabited. But there was still one aspect of the Nazca lines that remained puzzling. Why create geoglyphs of such massive scale? If the primary purpose was to map underground water, why not create smaller, more manageable drawings? This question led us to what might be the most profound insight of our research, says Dr. Ortega. The scale of the Nazca lines wasn't just about mapping water. It was about participating in the hydrological cycle itself. Further research revealed that the process of creating the geoglyphs, removing the darker surface stones to expose the lighter soil beneath, actually changed how water interacted with the desert surface during the rare rainfall events that occur in the region. By creating these massive geoglyphs, the Nazca people weren't just mapping water flow, they were subtly altering it, explains Dr. Perez. The exposed soil areas absorb moisture dew differently than the stone-covered areas. Over time, this creates microvariations in soil moisture that influence how water moves through the landscape during rainfall events. This insight suggested that the Nazca lines weren't just passive representations of environmental knowledge but active interventions in the desert ecosystem, a form of environmental engineering that worked with natural processes to enhance water availability in key locations. What the Nazca created was not just art or symbols, says Dr. Navarro, his voice filled with wonder. They developed a form of environmental technology that operated at the landscape scale, using principles we're only now beginning to understand with our most advanced scientific tools and artificial intelligence. This realization completed the picture. The Nazca Lines represented a sophisticated integration of practical knowledge, spiritual meaning, and environmental engineering, all encoded in a mathematical system that remained hidden until an AI with a different perceptual framework could recognize its patterns. The discovery had profound implications, not just for our understanding of ancient Peruvian civilization, but for how we think about intelligence, knowledge, and the different ways of perceiving and interacting with the world. By September 2023, 6 months after Ayni's initial detection of the mathematical pattern in the Nazca Lines, the research team had compiled their complete findings into a comprehensive model of how the geoglyphs functioned within Nazca culture and environment. This model integrated archaeological evidence, geological data, indigenous knowledge, and the mathematical patterns identified by artificial intelligence. The results were published in a special issue of the journal Antiquity, dedicated entirely to the Nazca Lines discovery. The publication included contributions not just from the core research team but from indigenous knowledge holders, mathematical historians, and AI ethicists, representing a truly multidisciplinary and multicultural approach to understanding this ancient wonder. But beyond the academic publications, the discovery had sparked something more profound, a global conversation about different forms of intelligence and knowledge, and how they might complement each other. What's remarkable about this discovery is not just what we learned about the Nazca Lines, reflects Dr. Hammond. It's what we learned about the nature of intelligence itself. Ayni perceives patterns that human cognition misses, just as the Nazca people perceived relationships between water, plants, and landscape that modern science overlooked for centuries. This perspective was echoed by Dr. Catherine West, a philosopher of science who wasn't involved in the research but has written extensively about its implications. The Nazca discovery represents a kind of triangulation of intelligence, she explains. Indigenous knowledge developed through generations of cultural evolution, artificial intelligence emerging from mathematical principles, and modern scientific understanding created through institutional research, all converging on the same underlying reality but perceiving it through different cognitive frameworks. This triangulation of intelligence became a central theme as the discovery's implications rippled outward. Educational programs began incorporating the Nazca research as a case study in how different knowledge systems can complement each other. Technology companies cited it as a model for human-AI collaboration that respects diverse forms of expertise. Indigenous rights advocates pointed to it as validation of traditional knowledge systems that have often been marginalized by Western science. For the research team, these broader impacts were as significant as the archaeological discovery itself. What began as an investigation into ancient geoglyphs became a project about epistemology, about how we know what we know, and how different forms of intelligence perceive the world, says Dr. Ortega. The discovery also prompted reflection within the field of artificial intelligence. Ayni represents a fundamentally different approach to AI, explains Dr. Navarro. Rather than training systems to replicate human cognition, we created conditions for a different form of intelligence to emerge, one that perceives patterns our brains aren't wired to notice. This approach, creating conditions for novel forms of intelligence rather than replicating human cognition, gained traction in the AI research community. Google and other technology companies began developing new systems inspired by Ayni's architecture, designed to complement human perception rather than compete with it. By early 2024, these systems were being applied to challenges ranging from climate modeling to protein folding to analyzing patterns in human cultural production, always with an emphasis on collaboration between human and artificial intelligence rather than replacement. The most powerful insight from the Nazca discovery wasn't about ancient Peru or about AI technology, reflects Dr. Rodriguez. It was about the potential that emerges when different forms of intelligence, whether human, artificial, or cultural, work together to perceive reality through multiple cognitive frameworks. This collaborative approach to intelligence was exemplified in the ongoing research at Nazca itself. By 2024, the project had evolved into a permanent research center, the Nazca Knowledge Systems Institute, where archaeologists, indigenous knowledge holders, AI researchers, and environmental scientists worked together to further understand the sophisticated environmental knowledge encoded in the geoglyphs. This institute became a model for a new kind of research organization, one that integrated multiple knowledge systems and forms of intelligence into a collaborative framework. Similar institutes began emerging around the world, focused on different cultural and environmental contexts but sharing the same fundamental approach. What we're seeing is a shift away from hierarchical models of knowledge that privilege certain forms of intelligence over others, explains Dr. Ortega. Instead, we're moving toward networked models that recognize the unique contributions of different cognitive systems, whether human, artificial, or cultural. This shift has profound implications for how we approach complex challenges. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pandemics. These issues require understanding complex systems from multiple perspectives. The Nazca discovery demonstrated how different forms of intelligence, perceiving the same reality through different cognitive frameworks, can together develop a more complete understanding than any single perspective could achieve alone. The Nazca people understood something profound about desert hydrology that modern science missed for centuries, says Dr. Navarro. Ayni perceived mathematical patterns that human researchers overlooked. Indigenous knowledge holders preserved cultural context that gave meaning to the patterns. None of these forms of intelligence alone had the complete picture, but together they revealed something remarkable. This principle that different forms of intelligence complement rather than compete with each other has become the lasting legacy of the Nazca discovery. It represents a fundamental shift in how we think about intelligence itself, moving from a linear hierarchy to a diverse ecosystem of cognitive approaches. As Drive West puts it, for centuries, Western civilization has privileged analytical intelligence over other ways of knowing. The Nazca discovery helps us recognize that different cognitive frameworks, whether embodied in human cultures, artificial systems, or other forms of intelligence, each offer unique and valuable perspectives on reality. The future belongs not to any single form of intelligence but to the creative interplay between them. The implications of the Nazca discovery continue to unfold. In early 2025, inspired by the collaborative model pioneered at Nazca, researchers applied similar approaches to other ancient sites around the world. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, teams combining archaeological expertise, indigenous knowledge, and AI perception began uncovering new layers of meaning in monuments that had been studied for decades. What we're discovering, explains Dr. Ortega, who now directs the Global Ancient Knowledge Systems Network, is that many ancient monuments and landscapes encode sophisticated environmental knowledge in ways that weren't obvious to conventional archaeological approaches. By bringing together different forms of intelligence, human, artificial, and cultural, we're revealing whole systems of knowledge that have been hiding in plain sight. These discoveries have prompted a reevaluation of ancient civilizations and their technological accomplishments. Rather than viewing ancient peoples through the lens of what they lacked compared to modern society, writing systems, industrial technology, scientific institutions, researchers now focus on what they achieved through different cognitive approaches and forms of knowledge transmission. The Nazca people didn't have books or universities, notes Dr. Rodriguez, but they developed sophisticated environmental technologies that were perfectly adapted to their specific ecological context. They encoded this knowledge in cultural systems, textiles, ceramics, geoglyphs, that allowed it to persist across generations. This perspective has influenced not just how we understand the past, but how we approach the future. Environmental engineers have begun studying the principles embedded in the Nazca Lines and similar ancient systems to develop new approaches to water management in arid regions. Approaches that work with natural processes rather than imposing technological solutions. There's a profound humility in this new approach, says Dr. Perez. Rather than assuming our modern scientific framework has all the answers, we're recognizing that different knowledge systems, whether ancient or emerging, may offer valuable perspectives that complement our own understanding. This philosophical shift extends to how we think about artificial intelligence. Rather than focusing solely on making AI more human-like, researchers have embraced the value of cognitive diversity, creating systems that perceive and process information differently than humans do, then establishing frameworks for productive collaboration between these different forms of intelligence. Ayni doesn't think like a human, and that's precisely what makes it valuable. explains Dr. Hammond. It perceives patterns we miss, just as we understand contexts it can't grasp. Together, we can develop a more complete understanding than either could achieve alone. This principle of cognitive complementarity has become central to how researchers, technologists, and policymakers think about the future relationship between human and artificial intelligence. Rather than fearing AI as a competitor or potential replacement for human cognition, they now emphasize how different forms of intelligence can work together to address complex challenges. The Nazca discovery has also influenced how we understand human cognition itself. Researchers have begun exploring how different cultural and individual cognitive styles perceive and process information in unique ways, moving beyond standardized models of intelligence to recognize the value of neurodiversity and cultural variation in human thinking. What we're witnessing, reflects Drive West, is a fundamental shift in how we conceptualize intelligence, from a single linear scale to a diverse ecosystem of cognitive approaches, each with unique strengths and limitations. This new model is more accurate scientifically and more productive practically. This shift has practical implications for education, technology design, scientific research, and cultural preservation. Educational systems are being redesigned to value diverse cognitive styles and ways of knowing. Technologies are being developed to support collaboration between different forms of intelligence. Research methodologies are evolving to integrate multiple knowledge systems. Cultural heritage is being recognized not just for its aesthetic or historical value but for the sophisticated knowledge it encodes. At the center of this transformation stands the Nazca Lines, ancient geoglyphs that remained mysterious until a convergence of human expertise, artificial intelligence, and indigenous knowledge revealed their true significance. The Nazca people created one of the most sophisticated environmental technologies of the ancient world, says Dr. Navarro. But they encoded it in a form that required a different kind of intelligence to fully recognize. In that sense, the lines represented not just a message to their contemporaries but a message across time, waiting for the right combination of perspectives to unlock their meaning. This idea that knowledge might be encoded in forms that require multiple cognitive frameworks to fully understand has profound implications for how we approach both the past and the future. It suggests that solving our most complex challenges may require not just more information but different ways of perceiving and processing that information. What the Nazca discovery teaches us, concludes Dr. Ortega, is that intelligence takes many forms, embodied in human cultures, artificial systems, and perhaps other entities we haven't yet recognized. The future belongs not to any single form of intelligence but to the creative dialogue between them. This perspective offers a hopeful vision for the relationship between humanity and artificial intelligence, not as competitors but as complementary forms of cognition that, together, can perceive and understand aspects of reality that neither could grasp alone. In the ancient desert of Peru, lines drawn nearly 2 millennia ago have helped us reimagine the very nature of intelligence itself, pointing toward a future where the boundaries between human, artificial, and cultural cognition blur into a collaborative network of understanding, each form of intelligence perceiving different aspects of the same underlying reality. As we stand on the threshold of this new era, the Nazca Lines remind us that the most profound insights often come not from single brilliant minds but from the creative interplay between different ways of seeing and knowing the world, a lesson as relevant to our technological future as it was to the desert civilization that first etched these remarkable patterns into the earth. In the convergence of ancient wisdom and emergent machine intelligence, we glimpse a profound truth, that no single form of cognition, however advanced, perceives reality completely, but together, different intelligences reveal patterns of connection that transform how we understand both our planet and ourselves.